All right, it's 2 o'clock. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. If you're here for a webinar on value analysis and value engineering with Lean Focus, you're in the right place. I've got myself here and Damon Baker from Lean Focus. We'll give our introductions in just a moment. But just to get started, to let you know, we're going to go through this. We'll have lots of time for Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, please enter those questions for us. There's also several handouts that you can download if you're interested. One is kind of a summary of the value analysis and value engineering concept. And then there's one on Lean Focus Consulting, Lean Focus Talent Solutions, and Lean Focus Content Licensing. So feel free to download those as you're thinking about it here during this webinar. This is proprietary information, so I'm not allowed to use it without our express written consent. And just an introduction of myself. So I'm Kevin Sutherby. I lead the Lean Focus Lean practice. I've been my background in Lean started 25 years ago. Had my own manufacturing company, and we made outdoor illuminated signs, but really had learned a lot of Lean, applying a lot of Lean to that business, and was able to more than triple the size of the business and keep the same footprint and make some pretty strong improvements in the profitability of the business. So I kind of learned on my own business. From there, I joined Danaher Corporation, and Danaher, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, is a company that's been on its Lean journey for over 40 years, and is pretty widely regarded as being successful at applying Lean principles throughout all aspects of the business. So I started with Danaher. I worked with new companies that we were acquiring, helping to teach them and chart their Lean transformation path. And then I went on and I ran several different businesses, one on the product ID platform. Was a founder-led business that we had acquired, so it was very early in its Lean journey. And I ran a medical devices business, a division of a larger company that was FDA regulated, so I got some experience at applying Lean in a highly regulated environment, and it works there as well. And then I ran a group of businesses on the sensors and controls platform. So those were global businesses, very, very different places on their Lean journey. But so I've seen Lean from running my own company to leading operations to leading businesses. I've been with Lean Focus now for a little over a year and working with a lot of clients in a number of different industries. With that, let me introduce Damon Baker is the CEO and founder of Lean Focus. Damon, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Kevin. As Kevin mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of Lean Focus. I'm also a managing partner in a lower middle market PE firm called Kotala Holdings. I too have about 25 years of Lean experience. You can see some of the companies I worked with here. Also worked at Danaher with Kevin for about 10 years. Was responsible for the Danaher Business System Office for North America for Danaher Corporate. Also led a med device business inside of the dental platform called Oroscoptic, and led the DBS function for one of Danaher's 5 platforms called Product Identification, which was a $2 billion platform of businesses in the coding and marking space, mostly industrial printers and inks and lasers. Prior to that, I had a career in consulting, working mainly for Fortune 1000 companies, and this is where I learned the value analysis, value engineering approach, working a lot with automotive, agricultural products, chemical industries, and was also part of the team that brought this methodology into Danaher Corporation and helped to standardize the tool and the approach across many of Danaher's operating companies. So I've led probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 100 value analysis, value engineering workshops / Kaizen events, delivering over hundreds of millions of savings in those events. So it's a very powerful tool. My lean experience prior to Danner was mostly operations focused, so shop floor, continuous improvement, Kaizen, leading factories and continuous improvement functions. And I live in the Madison, Wisconsin area. So that's a little bit about me. Next slide. So here's our agenda for today. So we'll give you a brief introduction as to who we are at Lean Focus and what we do and what types of clients we work with. We'll give you a general overview of the tool, value analysis, value engineering. We'll go through the process and some of the different tools we use during the workshops as we execute VAVE with our clients. We have a client case study in a consumer branded products industry. We've redacted the confidential information to protect the client's information, but the approach and methodology will be made clear. And then we will talk about the next steps, keys to success for having a successful VAVE program within your company, and further resources that you can pursue to learn more about the topic and get started. And then we'll end with some Q&A. Next. So briefly, Lean Focus is a business transformation partner that works in consulting, talent solutions, and what we call learning solutions. And the business system that we use to drive value creation within our clients, we refer to as the Lean Focus business system. And it's made up of 5 distinct parts, starting with guiding principles, which are really ways of working or true north principles that guide decision making and behaviors inside of a lean transformation. Then we have a set of foundational tools, which are 9 tools that are function agnostic, regardless of whether or not you work in sales, marketing, operations, finance. These are tools that apply equally as well to drive results in those functions. And then once you get up to the top pillars, growth, lean, and leadership is where it starts to draw lines around functional responsibilities. So growth is everything from ideation of a new product or service idea to commercialization or deployment of that idea for a product or service and all the processes in between. So each one of those tools represents a PowerPoint, a set of templates, a methodology, and an approach to affect a process improvement and deliver a result within that part of the business to affect change. Same thing with the lean system. When you move over to the lean system, we're moving horizontally from now I have a product idea or service to how do I make, deliver, and distribute that product or service within to my customers. And now we're focused on safety, quality, delivery, and cost. And inside of that are the tools that we use to drive results in those SQDC areas of the operations part of the business. And then on the leadership system is the way you run the business, the cadence, the rhythm, the strategic review process, as an example, how you target, do due diligence, acquire, and integrate companies using these tools, and then also the importance of culture and driving the overall people and talent strategy around executing this high-performing culture inside of a business as well. So these tools comprise, as I mentioned, make up the Lean Focus business system. There are about 50 tools in total that can actually be licensed, which is one of the handouts that Kevin mentioned in the outset of the webinar that you can download and learn more about these tools individually, or you can download some of the individual overview sheets for each tool as well. Next. Some of the clients that we've worked with over the time that we've been around, now going on a little over 5 years, we've worked in a broad variety of industries and verticals and different companies ranging in size from 20 million all the way up to 80 billion in revenue, and many different types of businesses represented from a manufacturing, both discrete and continuous manufacturing operations, service-oriented businesses, consumer branded product businesses as an example. And it's really a testament of the broad applicability that lean thinking, lean tools has in really any industry. So it's really industry agnostic as well. So as long as you have a top-down committed leadership team that's really intent on executing this effectively across the business, it works rather well. Next.
Okay, so let's go over kind of an overview of the process and tools here. So I think just to start, the reason you do value analysis and value engineering is really, to drive increased growth, to increase profits, and to reduce working capital. And it really does apply in all areas of the business, and often the same project can impact all areas. Now I'll kind of lead off with an example here. So one of the businesses I ran a few years ago was in the product ID business, and we had a high-speed camera that was a competitor had come out with a competing product. We had kind of the best product in the market. They'd come out with a product that was pretty close to as good in some ways. So we were feeling some competitive pressure. They priced it a little bit lower. Our selling price was about 30,000. Our cost was about 16,000. And we wanted to do a value engineering project on this camera. So we launched into this and did our preparation for the event, and we found several great opportunities. And one of them was this: we had a custom board in this camera and some custom components, and the cost of that board was about $2,800 at the time. And through this value engineering analysis that we did, a Kaizen event over a week, we found a standard off-the-shelf board and some standard off-the-shelf components that we could use to replace that. The cost of those replacement components and board and the additional labor and everything was about $900. So it was a $1,900 savings on that one board, which is 2/3 of the cost of what we were paying for that board to start with. It was 12% of the cost of the whole camera. And during that week, we found another four items that were worth about $650 to $700 of savings. So, overall, we had over a 15% improvement in the cost of that camera. The other key thing that this project did for us, though, that was truly amazing, is because this was an expensive and a customized board, and it was so expensive, we had to commit to 1,000 at a time. So our commitment was almost $3 million. So our inventory level would tend to be very high, and we could take them in 2 lots of 500 at a time, if I remember right. But so by also going to an off-the-shelf board, we could buy them in any quantity we wanted. So we had a major improvement in our working capital, over $2 million of reduced working capital, huge impact on our profitability because of the cost reduction. And it also helped us out a lot on the growth side, because we were able to reduce our price if we needed to against this new competitor that had arisen, and we used that to continue to dominate that market. So it's just a quick example, but that was one of my first experiences with value analysis, value engineering, and it was just such a great success that I became a very big believer in using these events to drive improvement in the business over time. So just a little bit of background. So the value analysis was developed in the late 40s by Lawrence Miles at GE. He was in procurement at GE. And he really presented this model that all cost is for function. And customers buy things for the experiences they're going to get through those products and services. So he first called his approach value analysis. It was later called value engineering at GE. But the idea of value analysis is that it's an organized effort to go through and look at the functions of a product and find what's the lowest overall cost I can provide these functions at the required level of quality and performance that's accepted by the market. So it's not about just making the product cheaper, because sometimes you get into cost reduction, pure cost reduction initiatives, and you end up going too far and create a quality problem, and that can cause damage to your brand and your long-term business prospects. So just to kind of talk through this, so if you think about cost reduction versus the value methodology, so cost reduction, typically you're looking at 5 to 15% savings. You can get up to 100% savings by eliminating functionality that's not needed in using the value methodology. The idea is that you really focus on defining the function of every component in a product or service, and working through that to say what is this doing? How do we do it? What's the best way to provide this at the lowest cost? And sometimes you can increase the functionality in these events by you've had kind of a nagging problem, and as you're analyzing a product, you find opportunities to improve those nagging issues that have been there for a while. But the whole focus of value methodology is to focus on the function. What is this? What is each component doing? Why are we doing that? Whereas on a cost reduction side, you really tend to be just looking at, how much does this cost today, and can I make it, can I do this, make this piece in a less expensive way? So a quick example of a screw example. So if you're doing a cost reduction of a fastener or screw, you're going to typically look at, can I change the material? Can I make it plastic? Can I make it smaller? Can I change the thread count? So maybe it's lower cost to manufacture. From a value methodology perspective, you really want to look at the function of that as a fastener, this screw, and say, could we join these shapes together and make this one component, that doesn't need a fastener? Can I crimp it so it doesn't have another part? Can I weld it? Can I braze it? Can I use ultrasonic welding, rivet it, use a stake? Really looking at, okay, what's the function of that screw, and trying to come up with, okay, it's a fastener. What are the other alternatives I could consider to fulfill that function in this particular product? So it takes some getting used to, but it's a very valuable approach. And that's why you need to go through it with kind of a structured approach to make sure that you get the full value of it. So if you think about, we define value as function over cost. So it's a typical equation. You can increase value by increasing the function without increasing the cost, or reducing the cost and holding the function constant, or any of the variables that go along here. And sometimes, as I said, you'll find that you find opportunities to increase the value to customers by the opportunity to impact one or the other function or cost, or both. But there's sometimes you go into these events and you have some unexpected and pleasant surprises of finding new ways to do things that the customer is going to appreciate and be willing to pay for. Okay. So the overall process is kind of, we go through the pre-study, selecting what projects we're going to look at, gathering some initial data on the bill of materials, the cost breakdown of that product, those types of things, determining who we need to be there from a team. And the team, sometimes in this event that I talked about, the team is often a cross-functional team. You want somebody to represent the customer, like a product manager, marketing, somebody as well. But you can also use outside people. We brought in somebody from our distributor for this component product on this camera, and they were really the ones that helped us find and evaluate this standard board and a couple of other components that we had to put with it to get us away from this very expensive custom board that we had put together. So sometimes that outside expertise can be very helpful in these. So then, you go through the value study, then you go through the implementation, the post study, which is where we make the changes, do the testing, implement the changes, and then, monitor and make sure that we get the full value out of what we did there, or what we said we were going to do. So the VAVE methodology is, kind of starting with the information, gathering, what data do we have? What are our goals for this? Why are we doing this? Is it a pure cost reduction? Are there, value opportunities here? Then we use this function identity called the FAST, which is function analysis system technique, which really helps to put the focus on how are we going to problem solve this situation. It can identify unnecessary, missing, or duplicate functions that you might have. Once you've got the sort of cost of the whole unit spread out over all the components, and you start into brainstorming to say, hey, what options or what ideas are there here? And we evaluate those and rank them based on, how complex they are, what we think the value might be. Then you kind of go into a development. It's like, okay, we've prioritized a few here that really look like they have some legs. What's the plan to get those in place, and what do we need to do that? And then ultimately, presenting this to management to get the approval to go ahead with making the changes and implementing the recommendations that the team has developed. So this typically, happens in kind of a Kaizen format, continuous improvement change. So, you get a team focused on this, product for a week and going through this. So some of the tools that you go through in the process. So we, start by, selecting our target product. We go through the FAST diagram process, which is, really allocating, looking at the function of each of the products and the interdependencies of the functions. And we look at the cost function worksheet, which takes all the costs of the product assembly and arrays it by part, so you know the cost of each component and you can evaluate that from a value perspective. Then, as I said, we go through kind of a brainstorming function of, where do we see opportunities to make changes where we maybe have high cost and low functionality, as an example, and we rank those. And this matrix here is kind of, what's the effort going to be to implement this change and what's the expected impact to us. So obviously you want to go with the, low effort, high impact and prioritize those. And once you've got kind of a sense of priorities and you've said, there's some big ideas in here, but they're a lot of effort and maybe not as much impact, we weed those out. And then you kind of go a little bit further in your pros and cons worksheet tool to say, okay, if we do this, what else has to change, or what are the other implications maybe, and just develop your short list of, what are your proposals to the cost to implement, the benefits, and how much time it would take. And that's ultimately your kind of output from a VAVE Kaizen event. So as I mentioned, it's typically, kind of a week-long event. Just to give you a sense for it, Monday is really about kind of introduction, understanding the product. Often you've got a product and you've torn it down. It's displayed, get everybody, to understand what all the components are. What do they do? Why do they do this? How do they do it? That type of thing. Tuesday morning, you get into this FAST diagram of function analysis system technique to really understand the function of each of the components. And you get into, Tuesday afternoon of brainstorming where you see ideas for cost reduction. Wednesday, we're kind of continuing on developing those ideas a little bit more. And then you start evaluating them in the afternoon to say, what types of changes are these? How complex are they? Starting to talk about how you would go through that. And Thursday is sort of putting a little bit of meat on the bone on that, thinking a little bit deeper about, okay, how much work would this be? What would we have to do? What testing, those types of things. And ultimately, Thursday afternoon and Friday, you're finalizing your priorities. Here's the projects that we want to do. What are the benefits? What are the costs? And making your presentation to management to say, this is the opportunity. This is what it's going to cost. These are the benefits and the cost savings that we expect to see. So it's a pretty, it's like anything. You've got to follow the process, but it's amazing how much you can do in a week when you follow this process, and how much ground you can cover and opportunities you can get out of it. And you also get the alignment because you've got the cross-functional team. So you shouldn't have to go do a lot of convincing other functions at this point that this is a change we want to make. That function hopefully was there during the Kaizen week, i.e. product management or supply chain or engineering or whoever needed to be there to weigh in and ultimately be part of recommending the solution. All right. So next, Damon, do you want to go over this case study?
Sure. Next. So a little background summary on this client. So this client was in the consumer branded products category. It's outdoor equipment. And they had 6 product lines that they wanted to assess for opportunity to utilize value analysis, value engineering as a way to drive margin expansion at their overall strategy. So we're trying to affect profitability for this client. So we started with a portfolio analysis, which I'll show you that approach. And after that portfolio analysis, we identified 5 distinct products within those brands that we would facilitate Kaizen event for. And this was during the first year of COVID. And the other hurdle we had was they couldn't do any of this in person. So we had to facilitate all of these activities remotely with product management, with operations, quality, marketing, the whole works, everybody that was involved in this. So we set up a Box shared drive to house all these data analytics and work through these projects and the analysis phase together, and then did a final report out which identified the Kaizen event opportunities. And then during a 1-week Kaizen, we had 5 teams running simultaneously in 5 remote locations facilitated by a lean focus facilitator. And I would also add that everybody on the teams was new to this methodology and this way of thinking. So for the boot camp objectives, of course, we wanted to train the members of the teams in the methodology and tools so that they could apply this in future events that they would house themselves. We wanted to give them the ability to provide these products within these brands at a lower price while maintaining the margins that they were used to while not sacrificing the quality and the durability of the product, which was very important in this application specifically. And then the customers also have a very strong voice in terms of features and benefits and things like that. So all these ideas had to be run through them. The lessons learned from this virtual approach, they took and developed into their company XYZ VAP playbook for running these post Kaizen. And then we wanted to utilize this process to realize a combined savings target range of 1 to 3.5 million in savings. So those were the targets on the outset. Next. So we started with this 3-phase portfolio analysis. So this is a great place to start in a business that hasn't employed VAVE methodology before and then has a platform of products. So where do you start? So we start with a set of tools and processes around strategic direction. So understanding what's the market strategy for the business, what are the profit targets, what's the product pipeline look like in terms of things that we're launching new, products that we're obsoleting, and so on. And then we go into a phase 2 where we're looking at more detailed analytics around cost quality analysis, things like warranty expense and scrap and these kinds of things. The product life cycle, how late in the life cycle or early in the life cycle is, what volumes do they forecast in the remaining years and current year and so on. So all of this is distilled out and insights are gathered from this data collection phase, which then migrate into phase 3, which is a project funnel. And the project funnel may be by model or brand type, by product. It could be by a geo, which is supplier manufacturing location. Maybe you have a large key supplier that you need to partner with, such as the circuit board example that Kevin gave, or it might be within processes where we need to change the way we engineer products to accelerate our product development and our ongoing engineering change process. So this was a remote portfolio analysis that was spread out over 6 weeks. So we had homework in between the different times that we met, and then we came together and we probably had somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 to 40 people working across the company in these different topics to yield the project funnel. Next. So some of the tools that we're inputting into, so we call this the product portfolio analysis. So we had the product managers input key information like gross margin by product line, volume, cumulative percent of volume as a total of the overall business. And this creates really an 80-20 analysis of the product line, which we then sorted from highest sales and volume to know where the opportunities were for projects. Next slide. From there, we looked at the sales, and we were able to determine that of the 286 products that they sold, only 42 or 15% of the product portfolio made up 80% of the sales. So our focus needed to be within those 15% in order to affect the most profit impact on the business from a project selection standpoint. Next. So then the final deliverable of the portfolio analysis is this project selection matrix. So this team identified 20 individual workshops or Kaizen events that were identified as a result of this portfolio analysis. And then we gave them a Pew matrix or a criteria matrix to score those projects based on things like the benefits in terms of financial benefits, impact to profitability, how transferable are those changes across different product lines and businesses, are they aligned with defined business goals, do they enhance customer satisfaction, and are there any risk associated with those changes in terms of clarity, complexity, and probability of success. And then all these create a weighted score. So each company can weight these characteristics differently based on what's a priority, and even set the targets down below in terms of definitions for what each one of those impact and changeability categories represents. So ultimately, this is the teed up funnel of projects that identify the roadmap, if you will. And then from that roadmap, we got into the execution phase, which I'll talk about next. So just a high-level summary of an example of the savings that were identified as part of a portfolio analysis. This isn't this particular client, but this is an example here. So we have projects identified by product line, what the objectives are, what we think the min and max estimated savings impact would be. So you have a range of savings in this particular example of 6 to 12 million. And each one of these line items listed here would be 1 week Kaizen events that would be planned for in the pre-study phase that Kevin talked about in terms of pre-work, then the implementation and post-study phase, which is the job plan that Kevin showed with the visual. Next. Just an example of one of the tools that Kevin was mentioning that gets utilized during a Kaizen event. So this is what we call the FAST diagram. So it's a logic tree meant to show how the critical functions of the product interact with one another. And this helps to identify where you have functions that don't serve a purpose, where you have functions that are perhaps too expensive as a percent of the total cost of the product, and allows us to really view this as a system and to pick out where the opportunities are to make proposals or changes to the design. Next. This is really the meat of what you do in a VAVE Kaizen event. We call this the cost function worksheet. So the team takes the bill of materials with cost allocated to it and then identifies the 2-word functions that those different components perform within the overall product. So a function could be something like transmit torque. So then we would apply that function to all the applicable parts within the product or the subassembly, and then we would allocate a percent of those bill of material cost to those represented functions of the product. So rather than doing a Pareto by part number in terms of cost, you're doing a function cost Pareto, and what the function cost reveals is where you have value mismatches, where you're paying more for a function within the product that perhaps either you don't need or that a customer is unwilling to pay for. And you could even DRA some of those investments or dynamic resource allocation. So take some of those costs from one area, apply them into another area that maybe you are undervalued or under resources in to increase value to the customer. So when Kevin showed that function cost equation, that would be an example of how we would be doing that. Next. So once you have your cost function worksheet, this really shines a spotlight on which of the functions are highest cost. And then the facilitator organizes a brainstorming session where we take those high cost functions, we have all the parts laid out, they're labeled with weights, suppliers, piece part price, and so on. And we're brainstorming alternative methods to deliver that same function in a new, different way, or eliminate it completely if it's not necessary, or coming up with a different way to do the same function. From there, you have a big list of ideas that need to be prioritized, and then that would take us into the next step. Next. Those ideas are selected and put into bundled proposals. So many of the ideas that you come up with either stand alone on their own and can be done together. Maybe you have 10 ideas that don't conflict with one another and all 10 can be done. But many of the ideas are actually trade-offs where if you do A, then you couldn't do B, or if you do A and B, you couldn't do C. So we're trying to organize all of that into pros and cons worksheets where like for like ideas are bundled into project scoped proposals that will be written up as consolidated proposals in the next phase. And then those consolidated proposals are weighed in terms of the benefits, pros and cons. And then more importantly, what we would have to do is countermeasures to overcome those risks or those cons to those specific project proposals. So we're refining these even further. Next. So then what you're left with is the actual proposals that the team deems most likely to succeed. They spend the time to actually write these up. And at this point in the Kaizen event, we may actually even try-storm the proposal, mock it up in real life, do a 3D printed part, or use duct tape and cardboard and 2x4s to simulate what this might look like. So we're trying as much as possible to refine and enhance the idea to see how viable it is. And we have a pretty good financial analysis as to the investment, if there is any that would need to be made to execute this idea. And it may consider things like how much inventory do you have to burn off, what sort of capital tooling investments might you need to make. Maybe there's testing or regulatory that has to happen as well. So all of those things get considered. It's not just a calculation of one part price versus another in the new world. It really has to be a total cost of ownership calculation that puts these proposals together. So when we put these together, there's no presenting this to leadership half-baked. A lot of that work has been done. The heavy lifting of, is this really possible, has already been thought through. And these are the ideas that are really viable that make the cut to be on these summary worksheets. Next. Then all of those proposals, in this case you're seeing here are 5 Kaizen events that happened in that 1 week. So each line item represents each team's total savings that they identified in the Kaizen week. So 1.7 million. So we targeted 1.5 to 3.5 for the overall. And in those 5 teams, we hit 1.7 of savings that they could realize in these changes that they're willing to sign up to do across these 5 teams in this virtual VAVE Kaizen event. Next. Okay, so some next steps and resources. So some best practices around VAVE is, no surprise, you need to resource it. So my experience has seen the companies that are best at this, they appoint a tool-based champion or manager or leader that's driving this in the business, driving the tool adoption, working with the functional areas, and then also staffing this in terms of requirements. Additionally, companies that do this really well have dedicated engineering groups that this is all they do. So when we launched this in Danaher, we started it within one of the operating companies, and we started out with 1 full-time resource, did some of the Kaizens, showed that it saved money, and then we used those savings to finance additional headcount adds. And now that team the last I checked, was operating anywhere between 7 and 10 full-time people that are delivering 3 to 7% cost of goods sold savings every year annually. So they're more than 10x funding their salaries here as sort of an ongoing tool to drive productivity and material savings. The other thing is these teams, they set aside physical areas. We call them tear down Obeo rooms. So inside of these rooms would be not only all your products displayed visually in pieces and in units, but tagged, weighted, part numbered, supplier information, quantity per, all of those things. And in addition to your products being in this room, your competitors' products are also in this room displayed next to yours. And we would see who ranks first, second, and third in all the major metric categories that matter. And you're using this as really ongoing standard work throughout the year to identify further project funnel opportunities. So probably the best industry at this is automotive. They have to be constantly looking at what competitive products and features are so that they can stay competitive as well. Target costing and profit plans by product family. So part of the reason why opportunity exists in value analysis, which is engineering after it's been launched, is because we didn't apply this methodology in the product development process. So if you want to avoid a lot of that design waste, you want to incorporate this into the new product development process as much as possible. And before you even launch a product, you know what the target cost should be based on benchmarks, by commodity, by circuit board, by wire harness. You sort of know where you need to be price-wise, and you can design to cost versus just allowing the design to take a shape of its own. Cross-functional design build teams. So I remember one of the first events we did in Danaher, there was a reluctance to do it on a product that was just launched because the engineering team felt like it was a waste of time because they had gone through a very rigorous 18-month development process and that they told us, quote unquote, that we wouldn't find any savings. So we're able to get the president to convince them otherwise. And in those projects, we did 4 events on that product line. We identified another 30%, and this was the highest margin printer they'd ever launched. And we found another 30% because we used cross-functional involvement beyond NPD. We had suppliers involved, we had operations involved, the service techs that installed the product involved, and you're just able to uncover so much more that the designers just aren't thinking about because they're not designing it with that in mind. The bottleneck that gets created when you launch a VAVE program is you have a lot of ideas that you want to implement, but then your engineering change processes become the bottleneck. How do you get these ECOs written, executed, first part approval processes, inventory bleed down, part number changes, all those things that happen administratively to enable the change wind up slowing the savings down. So if you're not value stream mapping that whole process and eliminating the waste from that whole process, you may be disappointed in the savings realization that happens post Kaizen event. I talked about integrating VE, value engineering, into the new product development process as part of defined stage gates. So we had, as part of NPD, 0 look, first look, and second look value engineering events. From we have prints, we do a value engineering Kaizen. We have prototypes, we do a value engineering Kaizen. Once we have first part that are production run parts, we do a value engineering Kaizen. So you do 3 VE Kaizen breakout activities before you ever even launch the product in production as just defined process, and that helps you to launch at a higher gross margin and get out all that design muda or that design waste pre-commercialization. The last point I'll make here is supplier development. So for existing products in your portfolio, the big lesson learned for me and many of the other companies that we worked with is your suppliers will act as an extension of your engineering resources. So especially for products that they make themselves, and you can come up with joint savings initiatives. So what we agreed to with them is they signed up to a preferred supplier program, and we shared 50-50 in all the savings that we identified, or they identified, either jointly through our workshops or through their own workshops on products that they sent to us. And where it worked out in their favor was if it was a product they sell to more than just one customer, they got more profitable overall. And then it helped to solidify the relationship with us. And then additionally, we would oftentimes invite suppliers in one area who would look at our products and see what we're using as other suppliers for, and use VAVE to get more of our business and move more of our demand to what they currently do. So the big lessons learned here is involve your suppliers, involve them early in the VE process, involve them in the maintenance of line of your products as well. Next. Kevin talked a little bit about team selection. I can't underscore this enough. It's probably no surprise here, but the team makeup should be cross-functional. It should represent the functions and disciplines that come in contact not only with the product, so think about engineering disciplines, mechanical, electrical, hydraulic, chemical, whatever disciplines are involved, but also market functions. So product managers, marketers, and so on. And think of the value stream that the product goes through. Does it get made? Does it get installed? Does it get serviced? And you want to involve all those stakeholders from cradle to grave as they touch that product, bring them into this Kaizen event, because they're going to have insights into how the product interacts with their environment and what ideas for improvement do they have within it. These people should, generally speaking, be open-minded. They shouldn't be of a fixed mindset and not come up with any ideas and think that this is a waste of time, and really committed to improving the overall profitability of the product or service being examined. Next. So in terms of a next step, one of the things that we can help you with is the planning, execution, and sustainment of one of these bootcamp Kaizen events. So what you're seeing here is a picture of the walls during one of these Kaizen events. And this particular one was in the food equipment industry. 1 week Kaizen reduced the bill of material cost 66%, which is a per unit savings around $14,000. So we can train your tool champion within your business, quote unquote, certify them through a train the trainer approach, and also license the content to VAVE to your organization so that you have all the templates and training that you need to make this part of what you do, and give you best practices around how to structure your organization, the standard work that needs to exist, and so on. Next. Some further resources. So there are numerous books written on the topic. Here are 3 of my favorites. So the one on the left is all around teardown. So it's written by Yoshihiko Sato, a guy who came from the automotive world, worked at Isuzu. And Isuzu is probably one of the best VAVE organizations I've seen. I've benchmarked them in Japan, walked through all their facilities. I've seen teardown rooms, pretty next level stuff. So there's great methodologies within there around Obeya rooms and setting that up. In the middle is the original book that started it all. So Larry Miles, or Lawrence Miles, the GE guy that Kevin talked about, he wrote this seminal book as sort of like the body of knowledge that exists around the process. And then later on, guys would come along the way that would add to it. And on the right-hand side is one of those guys, is Charles, by the way, kind of a funny last name, but he invented this FAST technique where it's the logic, higher order logic diagramming that gets embedded with function analysis during a Kaizen event for VAVE as well. You can also subscribe to our newsletter. So we send out a newsletter quarterly, which just gives insights into not only this tool, VAVE, but other tools as well within LBS. And you can follow us on our company page on LinkedIn, @ Lean Focus LLC. Next. Now, leave you on this closing thought. The man himself, Larry Miles. Value analysis is a disciplined, creative process attuned to one specific need, accomplishing the functions that the customer needs and wants in the best way for the lowest